We're so glad to be here with you. We're glad you're here with us this morning as we close out our series, Me to We. This has been a series that we've been talking about relationships. Relationships are so incredibly important in life. It's something that we all have, whether we like it or not. We all have relationships. And sometimes it's easy to think about a series at a church about relationships and think, oh, it's just about romantic relationships or a marriage, or we're talking about really all kinds of relationships, whether it's in your family or coworkers or classmates or whatever it is. We all have relationships, and they're so incredibly important. And the reason that they're important is because people have said before that you will be the same person you are today 5 years from now, except for the books you read and the friendships and relationships you maintain. Think about that. 5 years from now, you're virtually going to be the same person except for your relationships, your friendships, and the books you read, the things that you learn, and the things that you take in. And that's going to shape us as far as who we are and who we become. Relationships are important. In fact, I would even take it a step further and say that the relationships we have will be the single biggest determining factor for our future. I once had a mentor in my life that would often say, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. And I think we've seen that, especially with young people growing up. The friends that they associate with have a big impact on who they become. But in all of us, the relationships we have, the single big, more than our job, more than our home, more than where we live, more than our income, it's our relationships that will determine our future. So we believe that relationships are really important. So in week 1, we talked about the importance not just in relationships with each other, but our relationship with God, and how oftentimes if we're not careful, if we're not working on that, we have this tendency to drift, but also relationships within the church. We believe and we want you to have relationships with each other. I think we've all been to a church before where we feel like we're alone in a crowd of people, and we don't want that. We want you to find relationship with each other. Many times you'll hear people talk about, we want this to be your church home. Well, in a home, you have relationship with the people that you're in that home with. So we did a small group rally where we showed everyone, hey, are the small groups that we have, we would love for you to join one, because we believe that circles are better than rows. Rows are what you're sitting in today, and that's great, but we want you to sit in a circle. We want you to have community that you can share life and do life with other people and meet people and build friendships. So we offer our small groups. And if you didn't get a chance to jump in a small group that Sunday, you can find out more information at the Info Center and jump into a small group. It's a great way to meet people here. Very low commitment. You can just come and check it out. And if that small group doesn't work for you because they're weird, got a few of those, you can find another small group. And I'm sure there's a small group that you'll fit in and that you'll love. So that's what we've talked about that first week. And then the next week, I talked about how, sometimes it's hard to move from me to we. Sometimes I'm focused on me and how to move us towards that. And the best way was this simple question, just asking, what can I do to help? That when you ask that question with the relationships you're in, it helps move you to we. Saying, what can I do to help? What can I give of myself, of who I am, of what I have to help you and where you're at, and how that helps move us to we. So we talked about the importance of it. We talked about how to move you in that direction. But you see, there's one slight problem. There's one caveat with all of this, is once you get to we, whether it's in your church home, whether it's in your marriage and you become a we, or whether it's at work or whatever it is, sometimes there's a problem with we. And today we're going to talk about what to do when we goes wrong. Because sometimes, let's be honest, we goes wrong, doesn't it? I think we've all had conflict before. Maybe it's at work. Your boss just absolutely drives you crazy. Maybe you have that coworker that's driving you nuts. You see, sometimes we have problems with we because it's a relationship we didn't choose. It got chose for us. You can't choose your family, right? You can't. Some of us are like, oh, unfortunately, I can't. Like sometimes the family you're born into, you can't choose that. Your coworkers, you can't choose that. College students, sometimes your classmates, your professors, you can't choose that, right? And what happens, what do we do when we goes wrong? When there's a problem, when there's conflict, sometimes it's a relationship you do choose. Where that friendship that used to be so close begins to become splintered. There begins to become distance in our marriage or with our children or with our parents. What do we do when we goes wrong? Because we all know that sometimes we just goes wrong. See, it actually happened for my youngest daughter yesterday. We're sitting at the dinner table. My youngest daughter, she comes into the room, and she was been playing outside with her friends. So if you have kids, you know, they're like red-faced and sweaty, and their hair's all crazy. And she walked in, and she wanted us to know that she wasn't happy. Parents, you know this face. We're like, you know, and they like over-dramatize everything. If your kids aren't dramatic, oh, please meet my children. Like drama queen. So she walks in, she sits down, it's like, like obviously wanting us to ask, what's wrong, Isabella? And she, of course, was ready to tell us. And she told us about this friend that she had that played outside that was being mean and it wasn't being very nice. And she used this phrase, and she said that her friend, she was just being a bucket dipper. Now, bucket dipper, you know, if you know what that means, great. Well, in Isabella's school, they talk about this in her class, that we all have buckets in life. And when our bucket is really full, we feel really good. We're happy, we feel good. But sometimes life happens and our bucket gets really low and we don't feel very good and we're sad and we're not happy. And we can choose as people to be one of two types of people. We can either be a bucket dipper, where we take out of someone's bucket, or we can be a bucket filler. And Izzy was really upset because her friend was being a bucket dipper. And she wasn't real thrilled about her friend, the bucket dipper. And she came in and she told us about how she was dipping from her bucket and she wasn't being a bucket filler and all the mean things that she was doing. And it got me thinking that sometimes we're the same way, aren't we? And sometimes in our relationships, we've got our own buckets. See, this isn't just like this nice kindergarten rule. That actually happens in our life, doesn't it? I think we all know, if I said, I want you to think about someone in your life that you have some kind of relationship with that's a bucket dipper. Instantly, we're like thinking, husbands, don't nudge your wife. Wives, don't nudge your husband. Like, we're not trying to point. Like, I don't want to call anybody out. But, Pastor, I want you to know. Like, we all know bucket dippers, don't we? And there are some people that we love to be around because they fill up other people's buckets. You see, sometimes we goes wrong because we encounter some bucket dippers. So what we want to do is we want to talk about, what do you do? Like, how do you respond? Because here's the truth. I'm not going to be able to give you the silver bullet to fix every single tension in every single relationship you have. Because every relationship is so different. The background, the story, the context for your family, for that relationship, that friendship, that job, it's different. And there is no silver bullet to fix any of it. Sometimes the tension is there. Sometimes it's not a problem to be solved. It's a tension to be managed, right? So how do you learn to manage that tension? What can you do? What principles can you apply to your life? And what I found is that Jesus actually speaks to this. He gives us some words to live by, some principles that we can apply to our life that helps manage that tension and helps figure out what we do when we goes wrong. So what I want to do is I want to look first at one of Jesus' most famous sermons he ever preached. This is something called the Sermon on the Mount because it was a sermon he gave on a mount. It's really creative how the Bible does this sometimes. So Jesus, all these people came to listen to Jesus, so he kind of went up on this hill and he began to teach them. And it's one of the most amazing, we could spend months and months and months studying this one sermon, all these incredibly wise things that he said. So what people did in that time is, in fact, there was one guy and his name was Luke, and he was a doctor and he lived shortly after the time of Jesus. And there was all these writings of different people and different things that people said that Jesus said. And he said, I want to give an accurate account of the things that Jesus said and did. So he collected them and he recorded all of them in this letter. And we find it in our Bibles and we call it the book of Luke. But really this is a collection of all the teachings and sayings and things that happened in Jesus' life. So Luke records this in the book of Luke. And I want us to read this. This is Jesus speaking. So Jesus said, be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. And he goes on, he says some other things, but I want to focus on the last thing that he says that we can read in this verse. And at the end it says, for with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Now, the thing is, sometimes in church world, sometimes in Christianity, what us Christians, what we like to do is we like to find verses that like we really like and we try to use them on people. And you like wrong someone and they like come and confront you and you're like, what was that, Jesus? Oh, you can't judge me. Jesus said it. don't judge or you're going to be judged, sucker, and we like to find some way. And sometimes it's like, well, what's Jesus talking about then? I mean, does that mean that we can never, like every time we're wronged, we just have to, well, I guess it is what it is. Like I'll let myself get walked over. I mean, what does it mean when Jesus is talking about don't judge or you will be judged and be merciful if you've been merciful too? And what is this? For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. What's Jesus talking about here? Well, see, sometimes what we miss is we forget that Jesus and the things that happened in the Bible happened really in a time in history, in a place where there was a lot of context behind this. In fact, when Jesus was teaching, he wasn't the only religious teacher of his day. And there were other religious teachers that were saying other things. In fact, this idea of, for with the measure you use, it will be measured to you, this was a concept that other people were talking about. In fact, there's a story that another religious teacher gave that I think sheds some really interesting light on what Jesus is really getting at. And many of the people of that day, when they heard this, they remembered some of these other things. And I think it shines some light on how we can apply this to our relationships when we get that tension. So what I want to do is I want to read to you just this real brief story. Sometimes in the Bible they call it a parable. It's just a story with a teaching behind it. I'm going to read this and it's going to shed some light on what we're talking about here. It says, there was once a man who worked on a farm for 3 years. He went to his employer and asked for his wages to take home to his family. The owner said, I have no money. So he said to him, well, will you give me some crops that I helped grow? To which the employer said, I have none. The man then asked to be given some of the sheep, and the employer told him again that he had nothing to give him. The man went home with a sorrowful heart. I want you to imagine working a job for 3 years. And you go to your employer and you finally say, so, about that payday on Friday, can I get paid for the past 3 years? And he goes, yeah, I don't have any money. You go, okay, about some stock options, right? Because I've seen you trading. I know you've got a portfolio. How about some stock options? No, yeah, we don't have those. Okay, what about some benefits? I mean, is there anything you can, I've been working for 3 years and your boss says, no. I want you to think about how you would feel in that moment, the tension that you would be feeling. And I want to look at what happens next. It says a few days later, his employer brought him his wages with many extra gifts. The farm owner said to him, when I told you I had no money, what did you think? He said, I thought you might have lost it in some bad business. Then he said, and when I said that I had no crops, he said, I thought perhaps you released them from others. And when I said I had no animals, the man said, I thought that maybe you had promised them to the Lord. The farmer replied, you were right. I had vowed all that I owned to the Lord because of my son wouldn't study the scriptures. But yesterday I was absolved of the vow so that I can pay you. And as for you, just as you have judged me favorably, may the Lord judge you favorably. Now, what did this employee do? He gave his boss the benefit of the doubt. He judged him favorably. He said, I don't know the context in which he's living. I know my context because I'm in the middle of it, but I don't know what he's going through. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. And he judged him favorably. See, this is one of the things that I think we can apply to the tensions that we have in our relationships. See, so often when someone is mean to us, when someone's being a bucket dipper, we oftentimes don't give them the benefit of the doubt, do we? We think they've wronged me, so I need to wrong them, or I need to protect myself, or I need to. And instead of thinking about what they're going through, your boss that's being a jerk, maybe he's dealing with something at home that you have no clue. The coworker that is just a pain in the neck, you don't know what their family life is going through. You don't know what they're having to walk through. That coworker, or that classmate, or whoever it is, your spouse, do you really know what's going on? And what if we gave them a measure of mercy and grace? You see, it's much easier to reach out in love when we have mercy on others. When we're merciful to someone else, saying, hey, they really deserve this. You see, you know what mercy is? It's not giving someone something that they deserve. Say, you deserve retribution, but I'm going to hold that back. You deserve judgment, but I'm going to realize that it's not my job to do that judgment. It's God's job. And I'm going to trust that he can do his job. And what's my job? It's my job to love. So I'm going to withhold. I'm going to be merciful to you. And when we do that, it's kind of hard to hold on to a grudge when we keep giving the other person the benefit of the doubt. That doesn't mean we allow ourselves to be walked on. That doesn't mean we ask for it. That if there's a toxic relationship that's doing damage to us, that we just let ourselves stay in that. Sometimes we need to remove ourselves, but we continue to give them mercy and grace. Because that's exactly what God has done for us. So this first principle of judging other people favorably, of giving them the benefit of the doubt, that can do so much in helping resolve that tension that we find in the relationships when we see when it goes wrong. The other thing is another thing that Jesus said in his Sermon on the Mount. And this one we find recorded by a guy by the name of Matthew. And Matthew is doing the same thing that Luke is doing, and he's recording these teachings of Jesus. So I want to look at what Matthew says. In this Sermon on the Mount, Jesus speaking, he says something pretty weird. He says, "The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness." It's easy to look at this and go, what? Like, what is Jesus getting at with unhealthy eyes? All of a sudden, Jesus is very concerned with your contacts, okay? So you need to take them out every night and clean them. Apparently Jesus is also an ophthalmologist. For some reason, Jesus is concerned about the health of our eyes. And some people have looked at this, and I don't think this is a bad lesson to assume, well, maybe what Jesus is talking about is the things that we look at. That if we look at bad things, then our whole body will be, full of darkness. That if we let bad things in, that there'll be bad things within us. And I think there's absolutely truth to that. And I think that's really important. But I think sometimes we miss the bigger picture of this when we don't understand the context. See, in everyday life, we have idioms. We have figures of speech, don't we? In the same way, in ancient times, Jesus and his culture, they had the same thing. They had figures of speech. They had idioms that they would use that they'd say one thing, but they really meant something else. Imagine, for instance, if we were all to die and thousands of years later, people were to uncover all of our journal entries, and probably it'd be our Facebook post, which would be a scary thing. But they discover all of our writings, right? And they look at it, and we say things like, "Man, it was really raining cats and dogs." And they were to think, what kind of planet is this? Or that she was barking up the wrong tree. She's like, "Man, that girl has some problems," right? I don't know what, or this car, this house is, our cable bill, it's really costing us an arm and a leg. It's going to cost me my firstborn child. You're like, these people had issues. I don't know what their deal was, but it's a figure of speech removed from context, removed from that culture. We lose the understanding. See, I say all those things, and we instantly know what we're talking about. Well, what Jesus is doing here, we're talking about the eyes are healthy. That's just an idiom. It's a figure of speech. Literally translated, it means having a good eye or having a bad eye. And what this means is when you have a good eye, it means you're generous. You look at other people's situation and what you can do to help them, how you can give, how you can be generous. And if you have a bad eye, that means you're self-focused or self-centered. You might say, "Dan, that sounds great, but how do we know this?" We can see this in other places when we translate it real literally. For instance, in the book of Proverbs, let's look at this first one. It says, "The generous," literally translated, a good eye, "will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor." They're generous. Another place in Proverbs 28, it says, "A man with an evil eye hastens after wealth and does not know that want will come upon him." See, having an evil eye or a bad eye is being self-focused, self-centered. Having a good eye is looking at other people generously. What can I do to help them? See, at the end of the day, many times when there's tension, when there's problems with we goes wrong, it's when our focus shifts back to me. It's when my focus goes from other people and it turns inward. See, what Jesus is saying is we need to have a good eye. We need to be generous in spirit. When we experience tension, we don't look and go, "Man, they're just, dipping from my bucket. I'm going to dip from theirs." No, it's saying they're dipping from my bucket, so you know what? I'm going to fill their bucket. They're being rude and nasty to me. I'm going to go out of my way to bless them and to serve them and to love them. See, that's what it means to have a good eye. That's what it means. Have you ever been killed with kindness? Does this ever happen? You're in a bad mood. You've got a bad attitude, and you just let people pay for it, and they're kind in return. You're like, "Man, I'm a jerk." Instantly you realize, man. When someone returns kindness and love for evil, it has this way of resolving that tension. You see, I believe if we can do this, if we can shift our focus to the other person, it helps resolve that tension. Will it fix everyone? Will it fix every problem you have? No. But again, it helps us and our heart relieve that tension. And the final thing is one of the most important things that Jesus ever said. I think this is a huge deal. In fact, in Jesus' day, did you know they had not just the 10 commandments, they had over 600 laws and regulations and restrictions, 618 rules for Jewish people. And they came to Jesus, a Jewish religious leader, and they said, Jesus, we got a whole lot of laws, like a lot of rules. And then sometimes people would even interpret those and say, hey, you have this rule, and what that really means is this, this, and this. And they would extrapolate those. I saw those firsthand. I actually had an opportunity to take a trip to Israel, and on Saturday, I went to take the elevator at the hotel, and I pushed the button, and it didn't do anything. It just sat there. And what the elevator would do is it would go up one floor, and the doors would open. The doors would close, and it'd go up one floor, and the doors would open. The doors would close. And it'd go all the way to the top doing that, and then all the way back down to the bottom. The reason they do this today in Israel is because there was a command. One of those 618 rules was to honor the Sabbath, and one of the things they weren't allowed to do was start a fire. So the Jews of today, the Jewish people have interpreted that and say, we can't run anything electrical. We can't drive cars. You can't push a button on an elevator because there's something electrical that happens, so we can't do that. So this rule created to create rest and ease, we went down the stairs every Saturday, and instead of driving our car to get to it, we walked. You see, they had all these rules and all these extrapolations, all these things. They said, Jesus, help me. What's the most important thing? What is the one thing that I need to do? What's the most important law? And this was a common question that people would ask different religious leaders. And they'd go to one rabbi, one teacher, and they'd say, what do you think is most important? And they'd go to another one and say, what do you think is most important? And they'd go to Jesus and say, what do you say is the most important command? Here's what Jesus says. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And before they could even walk away, thank you, Jesus, he keeps going. And a second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus, in a way, doesn't even disconnect these two commands. He says, as important as it is to love God, it's important to love your neighbor as yourself. And this can again be a little confusing. And how do we love our neighbor as ourselves? I've heard it taught that we first need to love ourselves before we can rightly love other people. And I think there's truth there. I think that that's true, that we can't have a really bad impression of ourselves and, I'm horrible and nobody likes me and might as well eat glue. I don't know what it is, but I'm horrible, but I'm going to try to love other people. Sometimes we have to fix that first. And I think there's truth to that. But I think there's something much bigger that Jesus is getting at. Because we can find this because Jesus isn't just making this up. It's not like he's going, love God and love your neighbor. Sure, that sounds really good. That sounds Jesus-y. He's actually quoting something written in his scriptures, in his ancient texts. There's this command that he's pulling from. And I want to show you where this second part is written, where this whole love your neighbor as yourself, where Jesus gets it. It's from the book that you all love to do devotions in. I'm sure you were reading it this morning. Yes, the book of Leviticus. I know it's all of your favorites. Leviticus is full of all these rules and laws and regulations, and if you've ever tried to read it, I know you get real sleepy real fast. I get it. But it's interesting because this is what Jesus is quoting. So let's put up Leviticus 19. It says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor, and if you look at it literally, it says, who is like yourself. For I am the Lord. You see, what the ancient author was saying is, listen, you need to love your neighbor because he's just like you. You see the wrong in him. You see the wrong that he's done. You see a term the Bible uses. You see his sin, but guess what? You're not perfect either. He's just like you. Love your neighbor who is like yourself. See, this last one has to do with sometimes we have this ability to see all the wrong in other people, but look at ourselves as innocent in the situation. You have tension with that classmate, with that coworker, with that family member, and it's real easy to see all the things that they've done wrong. It's a little bit harder to see the role we play, isn't it? To acknowledge, you know what? I need to love my neighbor because I'm just like him. I'm just as flawed. I'm just as fallen. I've made just as many mistakes. I'm not innocent here. And when we can do this, when we experience tension in our lives, but we can yet learn to judge favorably. I want to give this person the benefit of the doubt. I want to give them mercy. I want to come against them. I want to get revenge, but I'm going to give mercy. When you can learn to have a good eye, to be generous. Say, you know what, they're being a bucket dipper right now, but I'm going to be a bucket filler. I want to be generous in my life, what I have, and in who I am. And lastly, when we can learn to love our neighbor because they're just like us. See, I don't stand up here. I can't say these things because I'm a perfect pastor, because I'm a perfect person. I can say this because I know this is true of me. I know that I'm just like you. And I'm just like the people that have wronged me. You know the reason these things are so important? You want to know the reason these are true? These aren't true just because they're pithy sayings. These aren't true because maybe sometimes they work, sometimes. They're true because it worked for us. It's true because this is exactly what Jesus did for every single one of us. The Bible says that while we were yet still sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus, in all his glory, considered equality with God not something to be grasped. He humbled himself, took the form of a servant, a human, for you and for me. He was generous with everything he had to a greater extent than we can ever even possibly fathom. He was gracious with us. Paul, one of the early church planners, said that Jesus, he who knew no sin, actually became sin so that we might become the righteousness of God. He took our place. The thing that Benji talked about, the grace that covers us, that's what Jesus did for me and you. And it fixed me. See, cosmically, we had this separation from God. Jesus paid the price for every single one of us to relieve that tension. You might be in this room and you know that you and God, there's tension there. That there's some friction in your relationship with God. Maybe you're in this place and you don't even consider yourself a Christian. I don't know about this whole Jesus thing. I don't know. But there's something happening in your heart. You're realizing that there's separation between you and the Almighty. Jesus came to relieve that tension. Or maybe you're here and you are a Christ follower. But you know that one of these things, you have relationships where there's tension. And Jesus gave you the ultimate example. You know maybe one of these things is applying to you and you're sitting there swallowing hard because you know you need to give someone the benefit of the doubt. Or you know that you need to be a little bit more generous with your life. Or you need to realize that you don't have it all figured out. And you need to love that other person who's just like you. And there's one of these things that you need to respond with. See, here's the thing. The reason I can't fix all the tension with some pithy saying or some rule or some question, the reason I can't fix it is because at the end of the day, we can't change other people, right? If you've tried, it's been incredibly frustrating, right? If you've been married and tried to fix them, like you realize it's a real, bad situation if you try too hard. All we can do is decide how we are going to respond. Because at the end of the day, how other people treat you is their path. But how you respond to them is yours. How other people have treated you, your coworkers, your boss, your classmates, your spouse, your kids, parents, you can't affect that. You can't change them. That's their path to walk. You can decide how you're going to respond. You can decide the path you're going to walk. It's going to be a path of your own choosing, or is it going to be the path of Jesus Christ? The path that he laid out for us. And if that's the case, we've got some work to do. There's some things that we need to apply to our lives. So here's how I'd like to close. If you could bow your head and close your eyes. I'm going to pray in just a moment. And here's been my prayer as I've prepared today. It's that one of these things would jump out at you. One of these things would stir your heart and challenge you in a way that you know you need to respond to someone. Maybe there's some relational tension that needs to be eased, and one of these or more of these things is kind of jumping out at you. I want to challenge you to respond in just a moment. Everyone's heads bowed and eyes are closed. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if one of these things applies to some tension. It's nothing I do for me or for anyone in this room. It's for you to acknowledge, yeah, I've got work to do. I've got some homework to do. It's a way of acknowledging for yourself that you know when you walk out of those doors, you're not done. But I want to include another group of people, and that's someone that maybe I talked about you earlier, and you're not a follower of Jesus. You want to choose him today. I'm not going to have you come down. I'm not going to have you respond in any way beyond just responding to God and acknowledging, yeah, that's me. You're going to be responding with a lot of other people, so there's nothing to be afraid of. Saying, yes, God, I want to put you first in my life. So if that's you and you're choosing to follow Jesus, or you just know you've got some tension that needs to be resolved and you've got work to do, if that's you, just slip your hand up right now. Slip your hand. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Lots of people acknowledging, yeah, I've got work to do. There's some things I need to do. Once you've raised it, you can put it down. The challenge for you would be to walk out of those doors changed with a decision in your heart saying things are going to be different. I'd ask that maybe you talk to someone about this decision. Maybe it's a spouse or a friend, and get some accountability. Say, I need to act a little more gracious with this person. I need to give them the benefit of the doubt. I need to realize that, listen, I have my role to play too. Or I put Jesus first in my life. And if that was you, we've got a free gift for you at the Info Center. Stop by there. Tell them that you became a Christian today and they have a gift they'd like to give you. Tell someone so they can help keep you accountable. Let's pray. We'll close out our service. God,